Greetings to all our viewers tuning in to our channel. There's a question that has been quietly avoided for far too long in every debate about Canada's fighter jets. A question you won't find on feature comparison charts, in budget reports, or even mentioned in the loud and fiery hearings before Parliament. It's not about how much farther the F-35 can fly compared to the Gripen E, or how much better its stealth is. No, this question is simpler, but also far more dangerous. What if the decades-long debate was never truly about the aircraft itself? What if familiar phrases like, "there is no alternative," "NATO destiny," or "the inevitable path" were merely layers of rhetoric, concealing a generational decision about how much of Canada's future it chooses to control, and how much it's willing to hand over? For years, Canadians have been led to believe that this story is already settled, that all arguments are just echoes of a messy, exhausting procurement process. But it is that very exhaustion that has blurred an uncomfortable truth. The moment you believe you have no choice, you've already surrendered a piece of your sovereignty, without a single shot being fired. Then, just when every door seemed to have closed, Sweden stepped in, quietly, without pressure, without grand promises of a perfect solution. Instead, they brought a different kind of question, one that cuts deeper and is far harder to answer. Gripen E wasn't placed on the table as just another product to buy, but as an invitation. Does Canada want to remain a customer in someone else's value chain, or reclaim the role of a country that can design, control, and take full responsibility for its own capabilities? From that moment, the debate stopped being about technical specifications. It became a conversation about identity, about who Canada wants to be in the 21st century. And to understand why that question stirs such deep emotions, we have to go back in time, back to a name that still haunts the country's collective memory, the Avro Arrow, and the industrial scar that never truly healed. There are moments in a nation's history that leave deep scars, not because of war or military defeat, but because of something quieter, something more insidious. For Canada, the Avro Arrow was one such moment. It wasn't just the cancellation of a project, it was the point at which a country was forced to take a different path, one that even today no one can say for sure was the right one. In the late 1950s, Canada stood at the edge of the future. The Avro Arrow was on par with, if not ahead of, any military aviation program from the world's major powers. It was the culmination of homegrown intelligence, of engineers who believed that Canada didn't just have the ability to keep up, but to lead. When the decision was made to cancel the Arrow, tens of thousands of jobs disappeared overnight. Assembly lines were dismantled, blueprints destroyed, and an entire generation of engineers was forced to leave the country to chase their dreams elsewhere. But the greatest loss wasn't in the numbers, it was psychological. A collective shock that shook the very belief that Canada could build the world's most complex systems on its own. From that moment on, a new story began to take hold. One told so often it eventually became accepted truth, that Canada should be realistic, that in a world shaped by superpowers, the most reasonable role for Canada was to be a partner, a participant, not a designer. No one said it outright, but the message was clear. Let someone else do the hard part. We'll buy in, operate, and integrate. Safer, less risk, less controversy. And yet, it was within that very safety that a quiet form of dependency began to grow. Canada still had an aerospace industry, still had factories, still had brilliant engineers. But more and more, the core decisions were no longer being made at home. From software controls and supply chains to upgrade rights and maintenance protocols, these things slowly shifted beyond our borders. There was no dramatic collapse like the Arrow, just a series of small steps, each one reasonable, each one adding up over decades. That's why the scar of the Arrow never truly healed. It lives on as a buried memory, but resurfaces every time Canada faces a long-term strategic decision. And each time the old fear returns. If we try to take control again, will we just fail again? Will the cost be too high? And it is that fear, not vision, that has driven many of the choices made in the years since. It's in this context that the F-35 appeared as a rational answer. No risk-taking, no need to rebuild from scratch, no burden of trailblazing, just join a system that's already been designed, where everything, from software to maintenance, is standardized and tightly controlled. For many, this seemed like the safest way to avoid repeating the tragedy of the Avro Arrow. But it's here that a new question quietly begins to take shape, persistent and unsettling. Does avoiding failure mean accepting that we'll never be in control? And when Canada put pen to paper for the F-35, was it really buying a jet or entering a technological power structure where the decisions are no longer entirely its own? To answer that, we have to stop looking at the F-35 as just a fighter aircraft and start seeing it for what it truly is, a modern system of power, with the jet merely being the visible tip of the iceberg. The F-35 was never meant to be just a fighter jet. From the very first sketches, it was conceived as the centerpiece of a new architecture of power, where dominance no longer relied solely on speed, altitude, or payload, but on connectivity, data processing, and information control at a global scale. When a nation brings the F-35 into service, it's not simply acquiring a combat aircraft, it's entering a closed ecosystem, meticulously designed to operate by rules that not everyone has the authority to rewrite. In that ecosystem, software is the heart. Every line of code controlling sensors, every algorithm sorting targets, every patch and update, they're all fragments of power. And that power is not decentralized. It's concentrated, tightly governed, and protected by an intricate mesh of legal, technical, and political safeguards. With the F-35, combat capability doesn't just come from what the pilot sees in the cockpit, but from what they are allowed to see. The aircraft's situational awareness, and by extension, the awareness of the Air Force operating it, is shaped from beyond the nation's borders. For Canada, this brings a certain peace of mind. Joining the F-35 program means being part of a vast alliance network where interoperability is guaranteed, logistics are standardized, and technical risks are shared. In an uncertain world, the feeling of going with the majority holds powerful appeal. It creates the illusion that all the big decisions have already been optimized on your behalf, that all you have to do is operate a machine that's already been proven. But within that smoothness, an invisible boundary begins to form. When a country can't modify its own mission software without external approval, when operational data flows through control centers beyond its territory, then ownership becomes a blurry concept. Canada may own the airframe, the engines, the pilots, but the system's real capabilities depend on a chain of decisions that Ottawa does not fully control. This isn't about hostile coercion. It's the internal logic of a modern power model. The F-35 is designed to ensure consistency, synchronization, and strategic alignment within a shared order. But the price of that consistency is a degree of technological sovereignty quietly traded away, a cost rarely discussed in plain terms. Every delayed update due to approval protocols, every new weapon integration stuck waiting for certification, every minor modification turning into a political process. These are the moments when dependency stops being an abstract idea and becomes a lived experience. For years, these limitations have been justified with a familiar argument, that it's a fair trade for security and alliance status. And for many countries, that argument is enough. But for Canada, a country still carrying the unhealed memory of the Avro Arrow, the story can't end with convenience. Because each time Canada says we don't need to control this part, it stirs a quiet echo of the moment it once gave up control entirely. The F-35, then, becomes the symbol of a familiar choice: stability over risk, participation over leadership. It represents a model where Canada plays an important role but rarely stands at the center of innovation. And for a long time, that model went unchallenged. Not because it was perfect, but because no one had asked a big enough question to challenge its foundation. Until Sweden stepped in, not with criticism of the F-35, nor with denials of the value of the US-led ecosystem, but with a question that shook the core of that familiar thinking. What happens if a mid-sized nation refuses to accept that software control must be surrendered? What if technological sovereignty isn't a burden, but the foundation for rebuilding national capability? In that moment, the Gripen E proposal ceased to be merely a technical option. It became an institutional shock, a direct challenge to the assumption that dependency is inevitable. When Sweden entered a debate that seemed long since settled, they didn't do what people typically expect from a defense contractor. There were no flashy claims about how the Gripen E outperforms its rivals, no attempts to undermine the value of the F-35. Instead, they quietly laid out an entirely different approach, one that began to shake the foundations of conventional thinking. This wasn't a sales pitch. It was an invitation to participate in a different kind of power model. In Saab's proposal, the aircraft is merely the starting point. The core lies in access and agency. Sweden understands its position well, a non-NATO country for most of modern history, forced to survive by developing technological autonomy and defending a narrow, unforgiving strategic space. That experience shaped the philosophy behind the Gripen E. It wasn't built to be absorbed into a closed ecosystem. It was built to empower the nation that operates it. For Canada, this meant something far beyond a defense contract. For the first time in decades, a partner presented the possibility that Ottawa wouldn't just receive an aircraft, but gain access to the core of its combat capability. The right to develop and modify mission software would no longer be the manufacturer's exclusive domain. The right to integrate new weapons wouldn't be confined to a fixed catalog. Maintenance, upgrades, and adaptation, all designed to be handled by the operating nation itself. These may sound like dry technical details, but in reality, they strike at the heart of modern sovereignty. The shock didn't come from the Gripen E being better than the F-35. It came from the way it exposed a long-hidden truth. The limits on Canada's sovereignty in past procurement deals weren't unchangeable laws. They were the result of policy choices. And once an alternative model was placed alongside the current one, the illusion of inevitability collapsed. Familiar phrases like "there is no other option" began to lose their weight. Sweden's proposal also came with a steeper demand. Control brings responsibility. If Canada truly wanted to own its software, it would have to invest in people, in infrastructure, in a deep enough R&D ecosystem to ensure that autonomy doesn't become a burden. The Gripen E doesn't promise ultimate convenience. It promises the right to decide, along with all the risks and obligations that come with that power. And that's precisely what makes the offer uncomfortable for those used to a mindset of passive acceptance. At the institutional level, this is a direct challenge. It forces Canada's defense procurement apparatus to answer questions that were once easily avoided. Does Canada want to buy capability or build it? Are we optimizing for short-term cost or long-term strength? And are we truly ready to embrace the complexity of ownership rather than the simplicity of outsourcing? It's no coincidence that the Gripen E proposal revived memories of the Avro Arrow. This time, it's not about a dream being cut short. It's about the chance to pick up a trajectory that was never fully realized. No one is saying Canada needs to become another Sweden. But the fact that a mid-sized country can retain technological sovereignty in modern military aviation has shattered a dangerous precedent, the assumption that only major powers have the right to control the core of their strength. When the initial debates quiet down, the real question isn't whether the Gripen E won the competition. What remains is a shift in how Canada sees itself, from a country accustomed to operating systems designed by others to one with the potential to become a co-creator. And it's at this crossroads that the story ceases to be about Sweden, or even a specific aircraft. It becomes a story about a concept now quietly reshaping the balance of power in the 21st century. Whoever controls the software controls the capability. To understand why that matters so deeply, we have to go one level further, into the very heart of modern power, where software sovereignty is no longer a technical detail, but the foundation of national self-determination. In the 21st century, military power is no longer determined by metal, fuel, or raw thrust. It's shaped by invisible lines of code running behind the cockpit, by how data is collected, processed, and transformed into decisions in the span of mere seconds. Modern fighter jets, at their core, are flying supercomputers. And in that world, software sovereignty is no longer a technical detail for engineers. It is the very heart of national power. Whoever controls the software controls how the world is perceived on the battlefield. A target classification algorithm can determine which threat is prioritized. A software update can reshape how sensors understand their environment. A restriction in access can silently narrow the operating space of an entire air force. When the software lies beyond your control, your combat capability is no longer truly yours. even if the aircraft carries your flag and the pilot wears your uniform. For Canada, this issue goes far beyond the military domain. Software sovereignty is where new value chains are forged. It's where engineers are trained not just to operate, but to create. It's where small and medium-sized businesses enter the defense ecosystem with intelligence, not just with manufacturing labor. Every line of code written domestically lays a brick in the foundation of long-term technological capability, and every piece of control relinquished is a missed opportunity, one that may never return. The difference between owning and renting technological capability lies here. When a country rents capability, it pays to use within predefined limits. When it owns capability, it invests to gain the right to change, to adapt, and even to fail, and to learn from that failure. The second path is harder, more expensive, and filled with risk, but it is the only path that leads to genuine self-determination in a world where technology evolves faster than any procurement cycle can keep up. Software sovereignty is also the bridge between defense and the civilian economy. The capabilities developed for fighter aircraft don't disappear in peacetime. They flow into AI, cybersecurity, digital simulation, and other advanced industries. A country that controls its military software is often the same country with a strong foundation in the digital economy. Conversely, a country used to depending on external software gradually gets used to being a consumer, not a creator. In this context, the question is no longer whether Canada has the technical ability. History has already answered that. The real question is whether Canada has the political will to embrace the complex path of ownership. Because software sovereignty is not a gift that comes bundled with a contract. It's the result of persistent decisions, long-term investments, and a willingness to accept that not everything will be optimized from day one. And then, when we place this story within the broader geopolitical picture, a unique space begins to come into focus. A space where technological sovereignty is no longer an abstract concept, but a condition for strategic survival. That space is the Arctic, a vast, frigid, sparsely populated region, yet one that is heating up faster than anywhere else on Earth, both in climate and in power competition. In this unforgiving environment, security scenarios shift quickly and unpredictably. New shipping lanes open, military activity increases, sparse infrastructure and immense distances demand extreme adaptability. In such a setting, no system can be designed once and left unchanged for decades. And it is in the Arctic where the boundary between software control and dependency on someone else's timelines and priorities becomes clearer than ever. When strategic conditions change faster than external approvals can arrive, only nations with the capacity to adapt independently will remain in control. That's why the story of software sovereignty doesn't end in a server room or a research lab. It stretches out across snow-covered runways into distant skies where Canada must defend its own domain. And to fully understand what that means, we must now take the next step into the layer where technology, geopolitics, and adaptability converge in one of the most consequential regions of our time, the Arctic. The Arctic is no longer a distant periphery in Canada's strategic thinking. It is rapidly becoming the ultimate test of the country's ability to adapt in a world defined by volatility and unpredictability. Melting ice isn't just opening new shipping routes, it's drawing in the growing presence of major powers, triggering more frequent patrols, and creating a security environment where response times are measured in hours, not months or years. In this space, vast distances and sparse infrastructure mean that every delayed decision becomes a strategic vulnerability. For Canada, the Arctic is not some unfamiliar front. It is a natural extension of national sovereignty, a region where borders are not drawn by fences or posts, but by the ability to maintain a continuous, credible presence. But being present in the Arctic is unlike being present anywhere else. Harsh weather, limited runways, and fragile supply chains demand that military systems be more flexible, more autonomous, and more ready to adapt to scenarios that no procurement contract could have fully anticipated decades ago. In this context, the concept of adaptability becomes more important than the initial specs on paper. A jet may be cutting edge in theory, but if software updates, new sensor integration, or shifts in operational doctrine require outside approval, that advantage erodes quickly. The Arctic doesn't wait for someone else's schedule. It demands near-instant responsiveness, the ability to experiment, adjust, and deploy in conditions no one can fully simulate in advance. Here, geopolitics isn't about bold declarations or direct confrontations. It's a quiet, sustained competition of presence and reliability. The country that can maintain consistent operations over time will shape the on-the-ground reality. And to do that, technology must serve strategy, not constrain it. The more a system relies on external approvals, support, or priorities, the harder it becomes to sustain continuity in a place as unforgiving as the Arctic. The Arctic also lays bare one of the great paradoxes of our time. It is both a zone of international cooperation and of rising strategic competition. Canada must collaborate with allies while protecting its own interests in a region where legal, environmental, and security concerns are tightly interwoven. This demands a high degree of institutional agility, the ability to shift approaches without undermining alliance commitments. And once again, that ability circles back to a core question: who controls the tools Canada uses to implement its policies? In the decades to come, the Arctic will continue to change faster than any planning cycle can fully predict. Today's scenarios could be obsolete within a few years. In such a setting, strategic choices cannot be anchored solely in present-day stability. They must account for future evolution. Canada doesn't just need platforms that can fly far or endure the cold. It needs systems that can learn alongside the environment, be reconfigured as reality shifts, and reflect national priorities without being bound by invisible limitations. The Arctic then becomes the clearest mirror of the entire debate. There, every abstract notion of sovereignty, industry, or software is tested in the harshest possible conditions. And it is there that the most essential question finally emerges inescapably. Does Canada want to enter the future as a nation that must always adapt within frameworks shaped by others, or as one with the capability and confidence to define how it adapts to a changing world? In the end, when all the layers of technical specs, budgets, and expert jargon are stripped away, one simple, unavoidable question remains: who does Canada want to be in this century? A century that is reshaping the global order. The choice between the F-35 and the Gripen E, if you look long and deep enough, is no longer just about two aerospace industries. It becomes a mirror reflecting how a nation sees its own role in the world. On one side lies familiarity, stability, and the comfort of walking a well-paved path. On the other, autonomy, complexity, and the heavy responsibility of designing your own future. There is no easy answer, and no choice is entirely right or wrong. The F-35 offers seamless integration with allies, reduced short-term risk, and a firm place in a familiar security architecture. But along with it comes the acceptance that part of Canada's control will always reside beyond its own borders. Gripen E, on the other hand, makes no promise of perfect convenience. It lays out a tougher road, one that demands long-term investment, political will, and the readiness to learn from your own limits. In return, it offers something rare: the opportunity for Canada to redefine its industrial capacity and strategic standing. The legacy of the Avro Arrow, then, is not just a sad chapter of the past. It is a reminder that generational decisions don't just affect a budget cycle or a political term. They leave a mark on how a nation builds, innovates, and believes in its own capabilities. Whether Canada is willing to view that old scar as a lesson or merely a mistake to avoid will shape much about the road ahead. In a world where power is increasingly defined by data, software, and adaptability, the choice between renting or owning technological capability is no longer a purely technical matter. It touches the foundation of the economy, the job opportunities of the next generation, and Canada's ability to shape its response to crises no one has yet imagined. Even if you've never stepped into an aerospace facility or written a single line of code, this decision directly affects the taxes you pay, the jobs your children may pursue, and the voice your country carries on the world stage. That's why this debate should not be confined to technical briefings or political hallways. It deserves daylight. It deserves public participation, open questions, and collective imagination about the kind of Canada we want to see in the decades ahead. So, what do you think? Is software sovereignty worth trading the comfort and familiarity of a standardized ecosystem? Should Canada continue on the safe path, or take on the responsibility of building its own strength? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective is part of this conversation. And if you believe that these deeper questions about sovereignty, industry, and national futures deserve more serious and thoughtful discussion, don't forget to subscribe. Join us as we continue exploring the decisions that are quietly shaping Canada and the world in the years to come.